Okay, cool. Okay. Sorry, I had to respond to something real quick. There are 2 people watching right now. Let me see if I can drum up a few more. All right, so I'll give it a minute or two before I. Good afternoon. I'll give it a minute or two before I dive in, mainly just to let people filter in if necessary, but. Boo, boo, boo. Where's that at? Huh, weird. So, sorry, thought I got a alert here. Okay, so we've got 2. I'll just get going, and then if people pile in, they pile in. Hooray! So, hello everybody. Thank you for coming today. And so a few things that I wanted to go over real quick before we get going and while we wait for people to filter in was so I'm in the process of catching up on animations or on assignments, on grading assignments. So first of all, I wanted to mention that. So if you are like, hey, where's my grade on it? So the thing about my particular position is that, whereas like some of the people that you take classes from are mainly functioning as teachers, like some of our adjuncts and things like that, I'm on what's called tenure track, which means that in addition to teaching, I also have responsibilities related to research and publishing and being on committees and basically more like full-time contribution to the like mission of the university, mission and functioning of the university in an academic, like the university's like academic aspect, right? So along with that comes kind of like I'm being pulled in a lot of different directions. So if like I'm slower at grading than other folks, since I'm not having to commute anywhere this semester, I'm actually better off at keeping up with grading than I usually am because I can take like the hour before class starts or something like that. But if I am a little behind, it's not that I've missed you or something like that. It's that I am getting to all of them. I'm just making sure I can keep caught up. So don't fret. Some people are really worried about it, but don't be. You're okay. I will say that that started that sentence off like it was going to be a bad sentence, but it's actually a good sentence because I've been, obviously looking at all the animations and have been looking at like you all are continuing to improve. So, good job everybody for keeping up with stuff. I know that this is a hectic semester. I know that this is a lot of, this semester is a lot of work. But both because of the situation, but also because of, it's just junior year is like a busy year. That's just kind of like where the rubber hits the road is you have to start doing stuff. And, I mentioned, well, I'll talk about this later in the lecture, but like you're kind of used to being like, here's the thing, go make the thing with these steps. Unless you've had me before, then you kind of know how I operate. This is definitely where it is become more standardized to be like, here's a here's a problem you have to solve, come up with a creative solution, and it's much less objective. It's, like you're not making something to spec, you're making something more open-ended and having to ask a bunch of questions that you yourself then invent answers to. So I know that can be very tough for some people. But, the work that I'm seeing come out is really good. And you're all, like, the quality of animation is continuing to improve for the entire class. So keep at it. You're doing great. Everything's looking good. And the reason we're having you do these exercises is animation is very much a field of like feeling it out and getting a sense of how animation's supposed to look or feel, and you can't really get a sense, you can't really build that sense unless you like watch a lot of animation but then also do a lot of animation. So that's what we're having you do, is we're having you do these small little things so that you get a better sense of timing and motion and how much squash and stretch and all these other things to put on stuff. And I see it starting to work. You might not be like Pixar ready at the end of the semester because it's 4 months, but that's called being a normal human being. So, just keep at it. You're doing great. Like, it looks really good. And I'm starting to see some improvement in the entire class. So, give yourselves the opportunity to pat yourselves on the back every once in a while, because that's important. That kind of thing is super duper important. So, but again, everything's looking really good. So, FYI. So the other thing to know is, let me answer this real quick. So anyway, so just FYI, know that you're doing a good job. Know that I know this is stressful, but you're killing it, and that's like, give yourself the opportunity to know that. The other thing too is like, not all of these are going to be portfolio work, but they're going to lead you to portfolio work, whether that be in 2D or 3D animation. And some of them might end up being portfolio work. You never know. But, it could be the thing that stays in there as part of a demo reel forever. It could be something that you just kind of like pass, you take out when something else comes along. But the point is that you practice so you can reach those heights. It doesn't just happen. We don't wake up and like know animation. You have to like work at it. We're not all Winsor McKay. We can't just wake up and be like, I'm going to make a cartoon short. That doesn't really work like that. And I mean, presumably he practiced and learned to. I mean, he learned drawing by just only breathing, eating, sleeping, and drawing. So even he practiced. He just practiced a whole bunch. So yeah, know that. Let that be the truth of your being, that you're awesome. But today, the actual lesson is going to be about character design. So, character design. Why do we even need to talk about this? Because, like, let's just draw characters. That's fun. Let's draw characters. Yes, but also, what if we had a, like, set process for this? And why do we want to have a set process? Well, one of the things about having a character design process is we can start to think about how can we relieve ourselves from the awful burden of having to be creative, like 100% creative. And that sounds like a very cynical thing to say, but really what I mean is that, like, what does the professional process of character creation look like? Well, we're here to talk about this. So today what we're going to look at is how much research do you do when you make up a character? What is the process of designing a character? Let's talk about, like, thinking about a character's design in relation to their function, and what does that even mean? Well, we'll find out. And then what is character appeal, and how do we do it? So first things first with research is understand that character design ideas don't just come out of nowhere. And this is usually, like, I've already used this image in the class, so I'm not going to, like, beat you over the head with it. But, you know, the myth of Athena being born by just emerging out of Zeus's head, right? We don't do that. That's not real. Stuff comes from inspiration from somewhere. So I use the example I use this one often. J.R.R. Tolkien, author of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, right? He did not just invent Middle-earth wholesale. He was a scholar in languages. He created his own languages through blends of other existing languages, but then also of, writings and, the letters of different cultures. Like the Dwarvish script is basically like Viking script, essentially. So he created these languages, and then from myths that he was referencing and folk legends of Western Europe, then created, like, peoples, and then created a place for them to live. But it's all based on these, like, very familiar mythological beings, and then occasionally he would, like, create his own take on something. Like the Hobbits are a little more original, but they still come from things. Or, like Gollum is, kind of offshoot from even that. So, these things start from somewhere, but they start from cultural sources. And this is why, for example, I talk a lot about, looking beyond your comfort zone areas. Don't just consume video games and anime and, popular cartoons. Look at, read a book you might not read. Look at, think about a hobby that, informs your work, or a story from your life, or people or go to a museum. Well, not go to a museum. Well, you can call ahead, make reservations now. But you know what I mean, is like the more cultural references you have that aren't just the rich outer life. The richer your outer life, the more references you're going to have, the more ideas you can work with. So this is to say that, like, when you make characters or stories, and really when you're doing the thing that we do as animators, which is, the reason we do all this is because we want to create characters that people love. And that doesn't mean that they have to be, like, all the same type of character. Think to Pixar and, some of Pixar's characters like Luxo Jr., where it's a lamp, but it's a lamp that is super adorable because of the way they make this character move and react. To be a character, it doesn't, when I was a kid, there was a very popular movie called The Brave Little Toaster. And, the humans would leave the room and then all the appliances would basically come to life because, they'd have big cartoon googly eyes and a mouth and a nose. That's not what Pixar's doing there. They are making a lamp look like a lamp, but act like a baby, or like a small child. So that's really, that takes some doing, and it takes some real design, not just in the look of Luxo. I mean, it's somebody's lamp. That there's not really much to design there, but in terms of a personality, how do we determine personality? How do we add all these things that people get attached to? And then how do we make that character feel really interesting? Look at this Swordy McSword guy. That person's Tracy J. Butler is the copyright for the character. But, it's not that this character likely was not invented wholesale out of thin air. This person who created this probably looked at, medieval clothing style, heraldry for knights and medieval clothing styles or armor styles, and took a little bit of reality, got themselves 70, 80, 85, 90 maybe even % there, and then created their own twist on it. And that's how this character came to be. Again, like Tolkien cobbled something together out of, familiar known things. So when you create characters, how you can make them wholesale from your mind, but why put yourself through that? Think about giving yourself a creative mental break and starting to think about if you're going to do a scientist, maybe look at think about the game Half-Life. Gordon Freeman isn't just he is a scientist and he has lab equipment, and there is there's a lot of fantasy about his armor, but you kind of start with a mix of hazmat suit and maybe SWAT armor or something like that, and you blend those things together, but you have a bunch of references, and then you can create something that looks vaguely cool, like what Gordon Freeman looks like in the game Half-Life or something like that. But the idea is that you're not inventing it from nothing. You are creating it from maybe a pinup board of pictures that you find inspiring for the project that you're doing. We had a student in one of our in the Share Your Work channel, for example, post a picture of a witch character, and it's a really good character. And she said, "Oh yeah, I used a reference. I hope nobody." They almost seemed worried about using a reference. I'll tell you this: real artists use reference, and if anybody tells you not to use reference, they're lying, or they're not a professional artist. I'm a professional artist. I use references all the time. That's how you get work done. So real artists use references. But, the person said "Oh, well, I had a 70s fashion catalog and I thought one of the outfits or hairstyles looked really cool." And that was amazing because it is this clothing style. It's a cultural artifact that they found inspiring, and then they created something cool out of it. So find that stuff. Or if you are I've talked a lot about working with the public domain. For example, we've had students in the past do Alice in Wonderland / Through the Looking Glass or things like that. You would look at, if you were doing that, you'd look at illustrations of Alice and previous versions of her. Now, her design doesn't really change over time. It's the basic kind of, if you're thinking about Alice in Wonderland and you're thinking about a version of her, they're probably very similar. Small child, blonde hair, blue and white dress. It's pretty consistent. So if you were doing Alice in Wonderland, you'd probably put up a bunch of reference images, maybe not including the Disney version because you don't want to tread too close to that hornet's nest. But the idea of that character is really solid. So you'd either have those in hand to follow, or maybe even to like find ways of subverting or changing that, or like referencing it lightly but maybe going your own direction. That's kind of, you look at previous appearances and that can be helpful for either embracing or choosing to do something different. So case study that I am going to use here is Don Quixote. So if you're unfamiliar with Don Quixote, it's a book published in 1605 by the author Miguel de Cervantes. He's a Spanish author, and it's largely considered to be one of the first modern novels. It's a novel that like works with and follows characters in their development very closely. But Don Quixote is a man, a 50-year-old man who is bored with his life and decides to become a knight. And he brings his neighbor Sancho Panza along with him as they do, and the book just kind of follows a series of episodes where they do a bunch of knightly things, and hilarity ensues essentially. But so I made a Don Quixote card game. Here it is. It's called La Mancha. So to illustrate this game, I needed a Don Quixote, or I could have gotten like plenty of public domain artwork, but where's the fun in that when you're an artist? So, I needed to find my Don Quixote. And to do that, I didn't just like read it and try to reinvent the wheel. There's actually very good descriptions of Don Quixote and Sancho Panza. But there's also, again, been like 400 years of images of Don Quixote. So I wanted to work with those. So I had to figure out like, all right, from all these sources, how can I synthesize my own version of this character, and what is the style, and what parts do I want to pick from each thing? I kind of liked the wild hair from this one image here that's an amalgam of like, it's a portrait of Don Quixote, but it's also a picture of Don Quixote in front of the windmill on the left. I actually literally now own the statues in the middle, not those exact ones in the image, but the copies of them. They're like a thing you could, they're a widely available thing, but I actually own those statues now. But like I thought the way that he was proportioned was very cool, and I liked the Gustave Doré illustrations like in the top right of Don Quixote. I liked the armor a lot, and sort of the face of the statue on the left. So I took this blend of influences and, came up with my own Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, which has both like elements of all these things, but also, like stuff in my own kind of semi-cartoony art style. Like you see Sancho's kind of his face. It's like very expressive cartoon face. Don Quixote, even I got better and better at drawing him. Closer to the like portrait one on the left, but the one on the horse there is like kind of almost there. But yeah, so there's like in my sketchbook Don Quixote, and I was able to, with some of these references, put him in different situations. Like, okay, what does he look like when I'm illustrating parts of the story where he's lost his helmet? What does he look like when he's jousting and has his helmet? What does his horse look like? What does Sancho look like when he's scared and has climbed a tree to avoid getting into danger? What does Don Quixote look like sleeping? These are all things that, by understanding your character, doing lots of sketches, doing references, you start to understand, like, not only what does the character look like, but maybe what does part of the world around them look like. And that's really important because characters exist in worlds. They don't exist in bubbles. A mistake that a lot of young artists make is that they just draw characters. And they know who the character is. They know kind of a basic, like, this is who the character is, but they don't really know they might not have their background or their story, or they might not be able to tell you what's the how do we meet them? Where is this character when, you've drawn a character, who are they when we meet them, and what is about to happen to them? Like, what is the plot that we are encountering them in? That's the thing that doesn't often get talked about when young artists make characters. So I would caution you, don't just draw characters. Think about what is the context of the character. And do research on your characters. If your character it might be original, but if you're thinking of a setting, don't just think the setting has to be all of your mind. It can be, for example, if we look at these early design sketches for Beauty and the Beast, when you're talking about 17th, 18th century France, which is basically what Disney does usually, is they will take whatever culture and era a fairy tale is from, they will design the movie to look like that culture and era. So Beauty and the Beast, again, 17th, 18th century France, they would look at fashion of that era. They would look at art of that era and architecture of that era and start to use those as ingredients for their character design. So we see, kind of like this super duper elaborate early concept artwork for Cogsworth on the right. And they have the idea of like, what if he's a clock, but when he is a human, he also doesn't look that different from the clock. And they followed up on this even in the movie, taken to like more of an extreme. But like when Lumiere and Cogsworth become human again, you're like, oh, they're basically the same, just significantly less clock-like. But see, like Beast's outfit is based, both Belle and Beast's outfit are based on real fashion from that era. So it's not that, again, these things don't spring from nowhere. They actually do research. And this is how creativity happens, is you come up with an idea, but you come up with, like, again, where to base these ideas from, and then you go and you do tons of research, you get tons of references, and then you work with those references to sort of cement a concept. So again, the process is you don't get it right always the first time, basically. You might do many, many different takes, and those takes may take you throughout, different parts of throughout the entire, like, development. So here, for example, on the right, you see a piece from the storyboard from Beauty and the Beast. That's not how either of those characters look in the final version, but, that is both during, it's a storyboard. It's not supposed to be exact. It's a sketch. Storyboards are sketches, remember? So you're working with, sort of early versions of these things, and that's okay. This might even be occurring at the same time that the actual character designers on the staff are designing the characters. But it's not that they're just designing characters. They don't keep drawing Belle, Beast, Belle, Beast, Belle, Beast a lot. They're also doing, what does the town Belle lives in look like? What does Beast's castle look like? What do individual moments look like in concept art? You want to be able to visualize these things, not just understanding who the characters are, but again, what is the plot? What is their world like? Put the character in context. What is their personality? Draw them in attitude poses. You've heard me kind of like jokingly reference, boy, when young artists do characters, it's always like there's a happy one and a crying one and a hugging their friend one. It seems like all the characters have the same personality. Define that personality even further. Like, when they stand, how are they standing? Are they tense? Are they relaxed? Are they kind of like, do they look ready for action? Do they look perturbed? What happens if they have to wait? Do they get upset? Do they start tapping their feet? Do they not care? Are they just kind of like content to chill out for a while? Those are things you should be thinking of. So the visual design of the character is not enough. You want to know who they are and who they are in relation to where they are. I went to a school with a lot of musical theater with like a very good musical theater department, and the actors that I knew, you'd ask them like, okay, so what are you in, and they would or who do you play, what are you in, and they would tell you all this like elaborate backstory of this character, and you'd be like, wow, that sounds amazing, and then you'd go see it and they'd be in the chorus in the background. And it's not that they're lying or we're embarrassed by that. What it is that to play their character in the chorus, to make a better performance, even as a character who just sings in the background and reacts to the stuff the main characters do, what they did was invent a backstory for this character that they were going to be, and allowed that backstory to inform. So like, let's say the main character was, two main characters got into a fight. Depending on who they've decided to be, this backstory they've invented, they would know whether their character would try to join in the fight, or maybe cower away from the fight, or maybe be the one to pull back another character, like another chorus member who is the more action one. They would know that they'd be the one to like pull that person back. But that informs their, that's not just like directions they're given. They get to make that up. And that's the kind of thing that you do when you're an animator. You're essentially coming up with all of these. You want to know these characters, even if it's not, explored in the actual piece. Again, these are backstories that nobody would ever see, that these actors would come up with. Nobody, they don't stop the play to talk about this backstory they've invented. It's purely in that actor's mind. But that matters because it informs their performance and makes their performance more genuine. And that's what you want. You want this to feel genuine and complete. And it doesn't exist unless you are building their world, not just them. And then also sometimes you're going to, sometimes concept art is the art of making just like tons and tons and tons of things and being like, well, this part of this version works and this part of that version works. If you look at like Star Wars Episode 3, when they were creating General Grievous, they just had a bunch of concept artists create a bunch of different pieces of a bunch of sketches, and then George Lucas would come in with like a red pen and just circle parts of different characters he liked until they synthesize like General Grievous. And he's kind of a doofy character, but like that's still a process that happens. But then sometimes what you get is these pieces that are something that like, I can't remember if this is for a senator or if this is actually concept artwork for like Darth Maul. But basically, sometimes you'll get a concept that's like a really compelling concept. It might be not quite right for the thing you're working on now, but you like shelve it for a while. And then later on, you're working on something else and you're like, now is the time. So for example, they had this design for this character, and it wasn't quite right. This is in Star Wars. It wasn't quite right for what they were working with, but they when they were developing the look of the Clone Wars cartoon show, they were like, aha, that's what the witches of Dathomir look like. So this thing, sometimes like designs sit on the back burner or on the shelf for a while and then eventually get used. Let me know if there are any questions, or please share your experiences doing this. I'm excited to hear it because I know there's a lot of creative people in the class. So I want to hear what you've all encountered. So I want to talk about, while commenting is going on, I want to talk about a game that I made called Swarm, a while back. So Swarm is a game where it's a tablet game, and you control a character who is basically a ball. And you tilt the device to roll the ball around. You can do this to make the character jump or tap the screen. And it's... Boop, boop, boop. Um, so it's a platformer, but it has kind of like the core mechanic is that you have a this sphere. Basically, like when I first saw it, it was in prototype with no artwork except what they call programmer art, and you had basically this sphere, and the sphere would be chased by little cubes, and you'd have to try to like lure the cubes into traps, which were just vaguely lava looking. And this was brought to me, and they said, we need art. We need to know what this game is and looks like, and who the characters are, if there are characters, or, what is the style of it. I've always loved looking at concept art and creating my own stories behind them. Helps me come up with a lot of ideas. Yeah, I think this came up in a previous class where somebody said, like, I like looking at different types of concept art, and something to the effect of, like, I like looking at art, but then coming up with my own plot of how it became, or how it came to be, or who the character is. And I thought that was a really neat idea, because it is like a, here's this idea that didn't get to be the main idea, but it's sort of like a repurposed, yeah, that was you, awesome. I thought that was a brilliant process. That's great. Where you just sort of like make up ideas for the stuff that didn't get to the production stage. And actually, so it's interesting you mentioned that. And off of the Star Wars idea, what was Rebels, Star Wars Rebels. A lot of the designs for Star Wars Rebels are actually characters designed by Ralph McQuarrie for the original movie that didn't end up being the final designs of things. So Zeb is actually an early design for Chewbacca. And like same thing, I think the Ghost might be an alternate design for the Millennium Falcon. I can't remember. But a lot of that show was based on like earlier concepts of different ships and different characters. So they wanted to really tie it to the original movie that way. So Swarm was basically like, we need to know what this game looks like. So I came up with 3 concepts, and I have only 2 here because I didn't want to like belabor the point. But one of the concepts I came up with is this sort of like skater idea where you have this character and his name is Hot Rod, and this is an interesting idea of like the in terms of game development, and I realize that not everybody's a game developer in this class, but like this is a character and animation specific problem just in games. But it's one of those rare instances where like the game mechanic is one thing, and then the artist sees it and says, well, what if this? And then the programmer then goes back and says, oh man, what if I did add that? So, because of the concept art, we came up with like, oh, let's have this take place in like skate parks. And all the concepts are about a skate park, basically, just, in different settings, like skate park type space. So, but the final game has a lot of half pipes and things. So the game actually does look like this. This was the main concept that was adopted. Our main character is Hot Rod. And, but the concept was like the characters, he's like running from these evil cop robots, and like that's not a social statement. That was just like what we came up with. And then, I occasionally look back and I'm like, wow, that's a really very relevant game. Interesting. But so yeah, like we have these, cop robots, and they chase you, and they're sort of like Keystone Cop, like silent film, cops that like trip and fall on themselves. But basically your job is to like roll past these traps and then try to lure the bad robots into the traps. So again, there's concept number 1. We ended up using this one for the characters, and this is like the first set of levels. And then here's one that was a more like on the other extreme, which was like, let's make this death ball Thunderdome thing where like people get inside these balls and then are attacked by these like evil, merciless drones for people's amusement. And same mechanics, just like now Thunderdome. And we ended up going with the first one. And sometimes your first idea actually will be the idea you go with. And it's kind of weird because I just finished up telling you like, oh, it won't always be your first idea, and like lots of visual development happens. But there's also times in concepting where it really will be the first idea. And you hear two different things. And this is what I was alluding to before, where this is the thing about creative problems. And I think one thing that I've discovered with students, not you, but like students, is that students are often looking for the answer. And it's always tough in this field because there aren't always the answer. But this is also why I teach the way I do, is that I want you to get used to that. Because there's a version of this type of education where I give you a set of exact specifications and you do them and that's it. But what do you really learn from that? That's a pretty good way to learn software. That's an okay way to learn software. But that's also, like, YouTube can do that. So what would you really... You'd be wasting your money if you were taught that way. What you get from this kind of thing, and what I want you to... Struggle's the wrong word, but like it does feel like a bit of a struggle sometimes, is like get used to the idea that there isn't always a neat, tidy answer. Like I can't tell you that your 37th one will be the one you get it. So you must do 37 versions. And then that will be when you know you are done. Sometimes you nail it on the first try. Sometimes you can't quite get it, and you try and try again, then eventually you trip over it. Or it comes to you in the shower or something like that. There's no one way that the right idea comes by. Sometimes, like, really what happened with Swarm was it was one of those cases where the person was like, give me 3. The client was like, give me 3. So I made 3. And so, like, Hot Rod was really easy to come up with. It was like, oh my gosh, I know, like, this is one that I kind of intuited. I did a pencil sketch even, like, for my friend who'd, sent me an email about the project. And I showed up to the next IGDA meeting. I was like, hey, what do you think of, like, I just came up with some sketch ideas. He's like, I want to see more of this character. So, here's Hot Rod, right? And, meanwhile, the other 2 ideas, frankly, was like, one idea was like, it's okay, it's fine. But then, the third idea, and I actually, I really like this painting still. I like how the death ball looks a lot, actually. But, the drones here are bad. They're kind of like, I guess the Matrix? I guess the Sentinels from the Matrix, but not. And really, sometimes, like, that last idea is the client said they wanted 3, and I'm just going to squeeze something out and maybe hope that they don't go for that idea. I actually thought this would have been fine to work with for a long time, but sometimes you do have to come up with an idea for the client, and you kind of maybe sabotage it a little bit to make sure it doesn't get picked, or hope it doesn't get picked. But, like, that's how this can also work. So it's there's no neat way to talk about this creative process. Sometimes you get it right away. Sometimes it's a lot of visual development. Sometimes you don't have the resources to not get it on the first try, and you just kind of draw something and you show it to your team, and they're like, cool, next thing. I've done a lot of that too. And, so character design it's an iterative process, but if you are working with people, you can just kind of like, you want to listen. You want to listen to other people. I even had this experience last night where, like, I've been doing this tile set for a game, and I, like, posted it on a Discord channel for the engine that I'm doing the game in to be like, hey, my project's not dead. I'm just spending a lot of time on this artwork. And a person said, hey, I have this feedback. And, I was like, I asked some questions like, oh, well, what if I told you it was for this? And they're like, no, but I would still try that. And it was a weird experience because, like, I was new to this community, but I'm not, like the person giving me the feedback was a lot newer to the industry than I was. But it was one of those things where it's like you want to just shut up and listen. You think you've got it and you're the creative one, but also like learn to shut up and listen. And I was like, okay, well, let me try this. This actually intrigues me. Taking this this feedback, like I think this person might be onto something, and they were. Like it made the work better. So like you wanna, no matter who it is, kind of shut up and listen. And I'm not always the best at that, but you kind of mentally hit yourself over the head and make yourself listen to the feedback, and then you kind of through that journey a solution emerges basically. And again, like basically for Hot Rod, they're like, oh yeah, that's it, yeah, you got this, guy. But like, let's use all of this. And we were going to make a level that looked like this for Swarm, but we never ended up doing it because there wasn't enough time. But, it's never a neat process, but it's a process, and you do it. Let me know if there are any questions about that. But that's kind of like a look back at making that game work. The game is, I think it's still technically available if you've got a Kindle. But the company that made it that published it isn't really doing anything anymore. So let's talk about function of characters. So function of characters, what do I mean by this? Well, obviously they're going to be animated characters, but maybe they won't be. So first of all, when you're designing a character, you want to ask yourself, how is the character going to be used? And if you're making an animated character, you'll likely want to make them more simple, or make a less detailed version of that character. And the reason is because you want that character to be able to be animated on time and on budget. Especially if you're the animator, if you make a super hyper detailed character, well, you're the poor sucker that then has to make those like hundreds of drawings to make them move, right? But if they're illustrated, you can make them less simple because you're only drawing them once. Maybe a few times if it's a comic book or a comic strip, but like, you can still get away with more detail. And I'll give you a practical example of that in a second. One thing, like an example of this to think about though, maybe is like Spider-Man that everybody's familiar with. Spider-Man is a hard character to animate because you've got to draw all of his webs. And that's why, like, the original Spider-Man cartoon in the 60s, because it was made for so cheap, they just, from the neck down, he didn't have any webbing on his suit. He just had, like, from the neck up, he had webbing. So, that's, like, if you want to do an illustrated character, you can make it more complex. But an animated character should be simpler. So, like, if you want smooth animation, I should say that. So like Gerald McBoing Boing, super smooth, but it also has like limited animation and is very simple. Simpler characters are easier to draw and animate. You can be more fluid. You can have more frames of animation. More complex characters are used in limited animation productions or in illustrations. So in anime, you see this a lot in like, so here's a picture from Neon Genesis Evangelion. These characters are hyper detailed, but they don't move a lot. You don't see them doing a lot. Like they seem to actually move most when they are out of their plug suits and they're in more their like simple school uniforms. That's when they're walking and talking and doing things. But when they're in their plug suits, they're just sitting there in their robots, and maybe like an arm will move, or they'll mostly have dialogue. Or, in this shot, Asuka and Shinji are fighting because that's what they do. And you really only have like maybe a few instances of like kind of movement, but and the characters sort of like staring at each other with their different attitudes and in character. Like Asuka maybe is the one that gets huffy and like turns away, but is still like standing straight. I think that this is when they're in an elevator. Shinji is just staring like an idiot because he's Shinji. And then Rei is staring into space because she doesn't really have a soul. Or maybe, I can't remember if she does. I'm not going to get into Evangelion lore. But you get what I'm saying. There's not a lot of movement here. And that works because, like, look at them. There's a ton of stuff going on in their designs. And, to really make a fully animated version of this would be very expensive. And you don't necessarily want to do that. So that's why, especially television anime doesn't move a lot. And if they do have an episode where there is going to be fluid animation, watch the characters. They will be less detailed. But, they might be silky smooth in the way they move. Another example is like I talk a lot about like shows that my kids watch. And, there's this show called Xavier Riddle and the Secret Museum on PBS Kids. It's really good. It's one of those like kids go back in time to meet the historical figure shows, and it reuses a lot of animation. So like a lot of these children's shows, there's like, when they go to the time machine, they always like run the same way to the time machine. And then like the end of that sequence when they're like, we're going to visit Abraham Lincoln today, is ever different. But what occurs from that is that like every episode really requires much less production. And then the parts that they do have custom for every episode are like jaw-droppingly gorgeous. I actually thought about taking a picture of the one that was on this morning, because I was like, oh my God, look at this lighting. It was insane. It was just a really incredible, like, they were talking to a character by like the light of an oil lamp on a table in a cabin. And it was like, why does this cartoon look this good? So, it's about that production management in a lot of ways. Now, computer animation allows you to split this difference. You can have more complex characters because you really only have to build them once. So that's an advantage of CG. But with CG, again, depending on your studio size, it might still not make sense if you're like one person doing this, or even a small team, because every model character asset is multiple things because you've got a model texture rig, blah, 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 blah. But for right size studio, it can be very economical. That's why like CG is considered now the cheap alternative. And especially like if you're going to make CG that doesn't look that good, it can be super cheap. Watch a few shows on like Netflix or Disney Plus, and you'll see like a few kids shows. You'll see a range. Like my kids watch like Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, and Mickey Mouse Clubhouse is rendered so cheaply to the point, it's rendered and produced cheaply to the point where they're almost undermining the principles of good animation that the company itself developed. But then like, and same thing, my kids watch this show called Super Y. Its animation is bad. It hurts to watch. But there's some real just sloppy work there. So, CG can be, you can have more complexity, but the flip side is that it can be hard to get right on budget. So you kind of have to like weigh your options and see what you can do. And then, you might have artistic goals related to 2D. So you want to not just default to these things. So here's Don Quixote again. Not because I like the sketch, though I do, but really, so this Don Quixote is, again, it's for a card game, and like these don't move. Like these are not animated figures. So they are illustrations. So they can be more detailed. I could do things like have little plates of armor and rivets in Don Quixote's armor and, on his shield and things like that. I could have little wrinkles on Sancho Panza's clothing and whatnot. But if we look at animated attempts at Don Quixote, at the character, not at the story, except for the one on the bottom, I did share this on Discord, but there was a really great article on Polygon about the times Disney has tried to make an animated Don Quixote. So that's worth reading. It's a good. It's just a good look into like failed animation production and why some things don't get made. But so if we look at these animated Don Quixotes, you see he is way more simple. He is much easier to animate. He doesn't have rivets. He just has kind of general ideas of armor, but something that could be done like really fast. An example that I showed in the last class, and I want to show you all as well, also is my current project is that video game based on Little Nemo and Slumberland, and so there's this character in the comic called Bosco, and he's a dragon. So Bosco is basically a carriage, and he's a dragon that like has a big ornate chair in his mouth, and this is used in this particular instance to prank Flip, which is the little clown character with the cigar in his mouth, who's kind of a troublemaker. But the idea is that like you get in this dragon's mouth, and then the dragon kind of like carts you around where you want to go. And so if we look at Bosco in this scene, this is Bosco made for a comic, and he's really only drawn like 3 or 4 times, because there's I think like one more row of panels after this one. But look at Bosco's detail. He has lots of whiskers on his face. He is very scaly. He has lots of scales on his back. He's a very detailed dragon character, and he's got kind of like a wrinkly face. He's ugly, but in like a big dopey dog kind of way. So he's got like lumps and wrinkles and stuff. So he's like this really interesting looking dragon, right? But when McKay drew him for the animated Nemo film, so the one that was in your the one that's in your syllabus, and that we looked at the beginning of the semester. If we look at this dragon in the film version, you're going to notice a lot less detail. So Bosco is a little lighter on detail there. Now, so if we go here, that is the exact right frame I wanted. Boop, boop, boop. So here, McKay had to draw lots and lots of images of Bosco. It wasn't just like a one-off like it was in the comic. Or I guess, 3 off. And there's, as you can see, there's lots of other times he's appeared. But, it wasn't just this like one hyper-detailed pose. He had to be drawn again and again and again. So you see some differences. Now, part of that difference is that this is like, 6 or 7 years after. Or 5 or 6 years after. So there's like some natural character differences, but still detailed, but much less detailed. A lot less whiskers, a lot less wrinkles. His look is a little more streamlined. And then if we look at his entire body as he crawls away in the animation, McKay pulls away from having so many scales, but provides body texture through much simpler to animate like spots. He makes spots on Bosco, and that allows him to kind of split the difference between detailed and animatable. So I bring up this particular character because I'm working on him now, and we're doing the same thing. We're looking at the different versions of this character, and we're like, all right, what can we animate? How can we make this feel the way it's supposed to feel, and get the best out of these, like synthesize elements of these versions while having like an easily animatable character. But we only really have him do like one thing in the game, so we can be a little generous with our detail. But so we have him as in the comic. He's got wrinkles, but not all the wrinkles. He's got some tufts of fur looking things, but not all the tufts of fur. So we can still, animate with him fairly easily. We are using, as you can see, Blender, and that affords us the like absolute superpower of being able to like draw head, copy paste head, copy paste head, copy paste head. You know, I mean that's like one of the reasons I had you use this, is that, like I said at the beginning of the semester, hand drawn animating, but with the power of CG, where you can like sculpt and copy and paste strokes, right? So I can sculpt and copy paste all these strokes that, you know, maybe like, again, the head repeating, while also adding in, like filling in, okay, had to redraw the body several times for this. This, by the way, took a while, so don't think that I did this like in an afternoon. But the point being, you know, notice that he doesn't have a ton of scales on his body. We went for the spots, which I turned into just like simple diamonds, 2 rows of simple diamonds. But the point being is that, you know, we're able to combine aspects of the different versions to have like animatable but detailed looking, while still being able to like be easily, you know, drawn for animation without, again, I've got so many animations to do for this game. I basically have to like, you know, make it as easy on myself as possible. So yeah. But you see, what we did is, you know, you judge based on like how detailed should this character be, what are we using them for, how often are we using them. You kind of almost budget your effort, as opposed to like, you know, this isn't like money budgeting, this is like effort budgeting. So yeah, that's Bosco. But, you know, that's us doing this process that you see with like Don Quixote, where it's like, well, we don't, this is, on the left, it's like, we're Hanna-Barbera in the 70s, and we are doing this for TV, and we only have so much money, so we cannot make super hyper detailed Don Quixote. We've got to make simpler Don Quixote. And you see that play out in things like Sleeping Beauty. You know, they spent tons of money having Evan Durrell do these elaborate backgrounds, to the point where like, this is a popular movie, but it lost money, and they were paying off Sleeping Beauty bills for a long time, and that's why 101 Dalmatians had to be made so economically. So, you know, you notice here, think about like, the background is super elaborate, but the characters are simple because they are moving. The background is not moving. So the background can have this like lusciously detailed like tree where you can see the tree and you're like, I know what that tree feels like. Because I get this sense of like everything being hyper detailed and hyper elaborate versus, again, the simple characters. That's not to say that they're bad or that they are on a lower plane of illustration or rendering. It's that they are, like, simple's the wrong term. I would use the term elegant. They accomplish everything they need to accomplish with an economy of visual detail. But they are, again, like, very beautifully drawn. And again, same thing. You see Belle here. She is not a complicated character. And her clothes are even like she's wearing a dress, but you don't have like tons of wrinkles that you would in like a real shirt. You know, you or folds, not wrinkles, but you know, like the sheep are simple, or the sheep are economically drawn. Belle is economically drawn, still very good. Somebody had a field day on that fountain, though. Man, you know, we talked a bit about in a previous class, like the ball bouncing, the history of the ball bouncing exercise. And Disney, the author of Disney Illusion of Life, said that actually used to be on the DL, kind of like a test for their animators, like where they should work. Because they would see like, well, did this person follow it pretty straight? We'll just kind of put them on the animation team. Did they make kind of a gag out of it, like it's actually a bowling ball? Maybe we do them on the story team. But then if they had somebody like do a stripe, and the stripe rotates smoothly around the ball, that's the person that they know, like send them to the department that does the technical illustration, like have them on water and fire. So somebody had their water field day with that fountain in this shot. But you see, even you know, you don't sit there and watch Belle and be like, man, her clothes don't have enough folds. You just watch Beauty and the Beast, and it's beautiful. And the same thing, like, you know, to use Nemo as an example again, Nemo in the comics has lots of folds in his very baggy pajamas, but if you watch the, like, 1989 Tokyo movie, Shinsa movie, he has an economy of wrinkles in his pajamas. It's more like at the joints, immediately at the joints. So, you know, that's stuff that you budget when you are doing animated movies like this. You don't have the time and money to make everything be, you know, hyper realistic. But again, like, CG can help. You know, so you have here Carpet from Aladdin. Now, their goal was to make, you know, they didn't want to make a full CG movie. They wanted to make a 2D movie, but they wanted to have it enhanced by 3D. And what they were able to do with Carpet is that, you know, it's a simple character, but they could lavishly detail him and make him look like a, you know, Middle Eastern carpet. And, you know, give it that sense of, like, patterning and things like that. Or at least, I guess, like, what people interpret Middle Eastern carpets to look like. They don't all look like that. But on the flip side, like, when you see the TV version of Carpet in the animated series, you know, he is much more simple because they did not use CG for Carpet in this situation. They used hand drawing because, again, this was when CG was the expensive option. Now it's the cheap option, but again, we already went over this. You get, like, bad CG because they don't spend the budget on good animation or rendering. So, you know, there's lots of variation on all these different types of productions. But you see, like, again, has, you know, budget for good CG Carpet, no budget for CG Carpet. So if anybody has any questions or comments, I want to hear them. I'm going to keep going. But next I want to talk about, so you hear me talk a lot about how motions read and whether you can, like, read motions and understand them, and, you know, whether characters have appeal. So one of the so appeal is the idea of, like, you know, can you read a character's role in their design? Is their design interesting? And is their design clear? So one thing with this is we've talked about silhouette. So silhouette is the idea, if you, like, black out a frame of animation, can you still read what's happening? And you want to have good silhouettes on your animations so that people can understand what's going on in them. You also want to have good silhouettes on your character designs so that you can recognize at the drop of a hat who that character is. So you see both here. You see clarity in posing so that the characters are, like, you know who the character is by seeing them. And in many of these cases, like, these are iconic animation characters, some more than others. I don't know how certain ones got on here, but you know, you have popular animated characters here, and you can, like, look at their silhouettes and be like, that's so and so. Now, this is normally in normal non-pandemic circumstances where we could be in a classroom together. This is where I'd be like, everybody call out who you see, or at least, like, I would point at them and people would tell me who they are. So I guess, like, to kind of have that, like, who do you recognize? Just tell me who you recognize, and we'll kind of make it, we'll kind of do a version of that. So who do you recognize? Tell me if anybody pops out at you. Some of these should be, like, hyper simple, and then some of these might be like, I understand why you'd miss them, because how did Bobby from Bobby's World get on here? He's the third from the right on the bottom. I mean, that's a good show. I loved that show as a kid, but, like, it doesn't have a legacy of some of these other characters. Yeah, Mr. Krabs, SpongeBob, Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse, well done not just doing Mickey Mouse first. Not that that's bad, but, like, that one's the underhanded pitch, because even the shape of his head is the corporate logo and a you know, hyper iconic thing. Hey Arnold, somebody got Hey Arnold. Mr. Peabody and Sherman, well done. Popeye, good. Yeah, Popeye's like silhouette of his head is super brilliant. Like his pose isn't the best, but you get that it's Popeye. Obviously, like with Popeye comes olive oil, second from the right on the second to last row. But yeah, good. Like you get some of these. Snoopy, somebody got Snoopy. Pink Panther, well done. Bart Simpson. So to go through these, you got Mickey Mouse, Daffy Duck, Fred Flintstone, Ren and Stimpy, Bart Simpson, SpongeBob SquarePants, Felix the Cat, Roadrunner, Marge Simpson, Yogi Bear, Stewie, Popeye, Mr. Krabs, Charlie Brown, Bugs Bunny, Wilma Flintstone, Mighty Mouse, Bullwinkle, Odie from Garfield, Goofy, Squidward, Dexter, Snoopy, Mojo Jojo, Olive Oil, the Pink Panther, Betty Boop, Arnold, Casper the Friendly Ghost, which, you know, is actually not that distinctive looking a character, except for his pose here. Peabody and Sherman, the Tasmanian Devil, Bobby from Bobby's World, Pinky and the Brain, and Marvin the Martian. So, yeah. Last class, I treated the class to my version of what are we going to do tonight? Or, gee, Brian, what are we going to do tonight? The same thing we do every night, Pinky. Try to take over the world. Anyway. But yeah, that's silhouette. And it's hyper important in character design because you want the character to be able to be picked up really quick. Part of appeal also is character shape. Now, what does that mean? Well, what is your character in terms of base shapes made of? A character that's made of circles has a very different feel than a character made of squares or triangles. And these are like the three base shapes you really see characters made out of. So, for example, a character made out of circles is typically, this can change or be subverted, you know, but they're typically a good guy. They're typically very happy or jolly. They're typically very friendly. Now, that's not to say you can't have a friendly square character, but square characters are tough. If not like, you know, this guy is not tough in like he's going to get in a fight, but he's more like kind of sturdy, jolly, like strong lumberjack dad kind of, you know, square shaped. And then, you know, triangle can be mysterious or evil or kind of like sharp-witted, or in this one, I think this is just supposed to be like hot dude. But, you know, triangle gives you certain like sharp features, and that creates different feelings. So triangle, you know, head shapes here with like this family. You've got dad, very like Dexter's Lab dad, like Saturday is the day for dads and dad's car, you know, kind of dad. So I don't really know what, you know, they have kind of like silly Cartoon Network dad going on here, but he's a triangle. And then Grumpy Kid is a square. Maybe he's stubborn, so he's a square. And then Mom is, you know, more upbeat and it says jazz up basic head. Okay. You know, she's more like upbeat and positive. So maybe there's, you know, like an interesting dynamic between square and circle. Same thing with like character design shapes. Like all circles is you get like Winnie the Pooh or a baby or asterisk. That's not asterisk. That's obelisk. I think that's the character's name. But, you know, that's like cute characters are often circles. Not uniformly, but often. Squares are like you got Superman or Frankenstein or Sully. They are squares. They are, again, tough, can be friendly or can be fighters, but, you know, they have a sort of like rigidity to them that can be, it gives the impression of strength. And again, in appeal comes, how do you pose your characters, and that's part of like understanding life drawing. You want to understand, when we looked at some of those early Disney things, they did not just say, all right, we're gonna draw our characters for Sleeping Beauty when they're moving around and dancing. They actually looked at dancers and followed that, so that you had, again, not realistic in realism, but realistic. Another square is Ralph from Wreck-It Ralph. Exactly. Yes, he is a square. He is a literal square. His fists are square. They're cubes. If anybody remembers Homestar Runner, Strong Mad literally did not have a head so that he could be a square. Whereas like Strong Bad was all just like circles. So life drawing, it's the ability to make believable movement. You want to have that, and then believable movement can add to a character's appeal. Having some believability will also then allow you to do like the squashy and stretchy stuff that we'll start talking about in the next few weeks. But yeah, so you want to practice this. It's not instant. You have to do this through practice, through trial and error, through, again, carrying a sketchbook around and being outside and seeing people walk by. All of these are things that don't really exist anymore. But, like doing just that trial and error, personal habit building, and the reason you do this is that, yes, it'll make your 2D stuff look better, but if you understand human motion, and I notice I say human motion, not just emotion, you should understand that too. But if you understand human motion, your acting will be better. And you're like, well, what do I need to act for? Remember, as an animator, you are acting. You are just happening to do so through a character that you're either drawing or posing in a 3D program. And your 3D will become better if you understand how poses work in real life and in 2D. So a thing that I would actually recommend like everybody do is get yourself a book of two things. One is like life drawing poses like this. And there's like just books of this that are like dynamic poses, like life drawing dynamic pose book. And then like I literally have a book that's just people of different ages and body types and like genders making faces, making a ton of faces. And the reason you have a book like this is that you can then use that as a basis for your character design. Now, where would you use something like this? Well, so here's a game that I've, it's kind of like every game developer has that game that they like probably overscoped and then never quite launched. Well, this is my game for that. It's called Dead Man's Trail. But, we used stuff like this to help define character expressions in, how we like posed the 3D characters' expressions for character portraits. And an important part of the game is looking at your characters' character portraits to monitor them for zombie infection. And, so we use that to help make like interesting characters with expressive facial expressions. And same thing for NPCs. We wanted the NPCs to have the same, richness. So I looked at even like, so as you can see, the guy on the right there, he's the leather jacket dude there. But, I looked at these images while drawing these characters so that we could have like interesting NPCs when we encounter NPCs in forts and things like that. and that's what you do when you define a character. You are going to not only make the character, you're going to make how they would express emotions of different kinds. And keep in mind, it's how they would express emotions of different kinds. A lot of young artists make their original characters, but they make them with like very cookie cutter expressions. Like they're, you hear me joke about this a little bit. Like a lot of young artists will have their character, and then they'll have their character laughing, and then they'll have their character crying, and then they'll have their character hugging another character, and they're all roughly the same. But you want to think about, like, how does this character express themselves in this way? What is their attitude? Do they smile? How do they smile? What does it look like when these characters do these different things? So, here's Meg from the short film Paperman, which is that Disney Pixar blended CG and like 2D, 3D movie. And, so they were defining how this character expressed herself, even if she never actually has some of these expressions in the movie. This is like how she would look in different situations. So this helps build personality if you're starting to develop these elements of a character. This is how you start to work out for production. Like if you're working on a big production and you have a team, you want to develop a guide, and you'll actually do this a few weeks from now as homework. You'll actually develop a guide of do's and don'ts for a character. And those do's and don'ts are really important when, again, if you are working at a studio where you are doing all the pre-production but the actual animation work is outsourced, because you don't want to send that to them and then have them draw the character wrong, or have them have the wrong attitude, and then you've made something like horribly off model. So that's where you get like Morty's heads do's and don'ts. So this is part of like developing a character, is like, what are the do's and don'ts? And then sometimes you just do good old fashioned concept art. But that concept art, you might have something like this that's a kind of general like perspective view of the character. But then you have what's this, which is called a model sheet. And this is actually, I believe this is your homework for this week. But the idea is that you don't have to do a digital painting, but you don't even technically check the directions. You might have to do a 3/4 or perspective view, but it doesn't have to be digital painted. But this is called a model sheet. This is like the final deliverable of final deliverables of character design are usually things like this, where you have the character like defined with poses and emotions and expressions. Often you'll have like do's and don'ts, so a style guide, and then often you'll have this is called a model sheet. And a model sheet is literally like, what does the character look like at different angles? The reason you do this is a few things. One is you want the character to be defined in a way that you're able to see adequately what they look like when they are drawn from different angles. So you don't want a shot to call for the character to be like walking away, and you don't have that designed. That wastes time, and that's not good. You want to define stuff like that early on. So here you have a character from a Blender video series, and this is the character front, side, and back. I should mention that back exists solely because she does have cool details on the back. You may or may not need certain angles depending on if your character is like very simple from the front or back or top or whatever. Notice that she doesn't have a top. She doesn't have a top-down view, but you might make a character that needs a top-down view. The other reason you do this, and this is actually very much why this particular one was done, is that when you do a model sheet like this, this is, if you're a character designer, what you hand to the 3D modeler to turn into a 3D model. Because if you're doing 3D modeling right, you're going to make a 2D image of the thing you want to model. So here we have a front and a side and a back. What you would do is you'd take the front view as a standalone image, you'd load it as a texture onto a plane, and then you'd have it visible from the front viewport. You'd do the same from the side viewport with the side image, and then if there's like a back viewport that you have set up, you'd do the same thing for that. And what you would do is you just 3D model, almost tracing the images. You'd check it from the front, make sure it's right from the front, check the side, make sure it's right from the side, and then you'd 3D model your character like that. You don't, again, look at a piece of concept art down here on your desk and then like fudge it out in Maya. You could do it if you're good enough, but I can say this from experience. I've tried that even within the last few years, and it always wastes more time when I don't just take the extra step of putting in the model sheet. So even if you're very good, use a model sheet. But that's what this is for. So this is one of the outputs. So that's one of the assignments, is you will do a model sheet. I think it is the one for this week. You don't have to do a digital painting, but you do at least have to have like front side view of the character. But that's the idea, is that like you would do the design and then you'd make it into something like this that is actually usable in animation production. That being said, thank you for staying the extra little bit. Let me know if there are any questions. I'm also available in Discord if you got to get going. But yeah, talk to you all later. No lecture on Thursday. So yeah, have a good one.